The year is 3087. Humanity, once the dominant force on Earth, has become a scattered remnant, spread across the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The fall of Earth, known as the Great Collapse, forced the survivors to flee their homeworld, leaving behind the cradle of their civilization. What was once a thriving planet full of towering cities and teeming with life is now a barren wasteland, covered in the dust of its former glory. But humans never give up. They survived, scraping by on distant planets, adapting to hostile environments, and forming fragile alliances with alien species. Some advanced their technology beyond recognition, while others regressed into primal ways, relying on brute strength and basic survival instincts. For hundreds of years, this period of human exile, known as the diaspora, was a dark chapter in their history. The scattered tribes of humanity lost contact with each other, their unity shattered across countless star systems. The once mighty species that had conquered Earth was now divided into different factions, with little more than a shared genetic heritage binding them. Time moved differently for them. Some advanced at breakneck speed, developing technologies that would seem like magic to their ancestors, while others regressed into a near-primitive state. The dream of reuniting humanity, of rising from the ashes and reclaiming their lost glory, seemed impossible. But peace was an illusion. The galaxy, though quiet for a time, was beginning to stir once more. And in the farthest corners of known space, on a forgotten world, humanity's fate was about to be rewritten. This planet, shrouded in myth and legend, was known to the few who had heard of it as Eternia. Time flowed differently here. Those who lived on this ancient world aged at a fraction of the normal rate. They accumulated knowledge and wisdom across generations, their minds sharp and their strategies honed like weapons. Eternia was a sanctuary, one of the last refuges for the lost tribes of humanity. Those who lived there had forgotten much of their origins, but in their veins flowed the blood of warriors, survivors, and conquerors. They were the descendants of those who had fought in Earth's final wars, the ones who had been forced into stasis, frozen in time, waiting for a day when humanity might rise again. In the heart of Eternia, hidden deep beneath its icy surface, lay one of Earth's greatest generals, Markus Draven. He had fought in the Great Collapse, leading Earth's final defense forces in a desperate attempt to save their home. When the planet fell, Draven and a select few were placed in stasis, suspended in time until the galaxy was ready for them to rise again. Draven's cryogenic chamber had kept him alive for centuries, while the universe outside continued to move, change, and evolve. Now, the time had come. Draven's eyes shot open, his breath quickening as his mind struggled to adjust to the sudden flood of consciousness. His body felt stiff, as though he hadn't moved in 1,000 years, because he hadn't. The chamber around him hummed softly as it initiated the final stages of his revival. Slowly, painfully, he sat up, the weight of the years pressing down on him. "Status," he croaked, his voice barely more than a rasp. A nearby console flickered to life, its screen displaying lines of data. The planet's systems had maintained his cryogenic chamber flawlessly. Everything was functional, except for one thing: Earth. The planet was still marked as unsalvageable in the system's archives, a cold, unchanging reminder of humanity's greatest failure. Draven swung his legs over the side of the chamber, planting his feet on the floor. He felt the weight of his armor pressing down on him, the familiar sensation bringing a rush of memories from his final battle. Earth was burning, the skies darkened by enemy ships, and he had led his troops into the fray, knowing they couldn't win. But they had fought anyway. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. "What happened after we fell?" A voice, smooth and synthetic, replied. "Humanity survived, General, but they are scattered, fragmented." Draven scowled. "Scattered? Where?" "Across the galaxy. You are one of the last of the old guard." Old guard. The term stung more than it should have. He had once been part of humanity's greatest military force. Now he was a relic, a forgotten piece of a dead planet. But if there were still humans out there, still fighting, then there was hope. How long? He asked, forcing himself to stand. 763 years. 700 years. 7 centuries since Earth's collapse. It felt like a blink of an eye to him. But in that time, humanity had scattered like dust in the wind. He gritted his teeth, feeling the fire reignite in his chest. They had survived. Somehow, against all odds, they were still out there. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered, his voice stronger now. "We're going to find them." The console beeped, confirming the command. Across Eternia, ancient war machines began to stir. Hidden deep beneath the planet's surface, massive ships long thought forgotten slowly came to life, their engines roaring to life after centuries of silence. Draven had been entrusted with one of humanity's greatest fleets, and now he would use it to reunite the lost fragments of his people. The galaxy had changed. New empires had risen, and old enemies had grown stronger. But Draven didn't care. He was going to find the remnants of humanity, no matter what stood in his way. He had fought for Earth until the very end, and now he would fight for its legacy. As the ships powered up, Draven donned his helmet, the weight of his old life settling on his shoulders once more. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a symbol of what humanity could be, a warrior from a time when they had stood tall, defiant in the face of annihilation. He would remind the galaxy what humans were capable of. With a grim determination, Draven marched toward the command deck. The fleet was ready. The galaxy was waiting. And humanity was coming back. The fleet's engines roared as the massive warships lifted from the icy surface of Eternia, breaking free of their centuries-long slumber. Thousands of years ago, these ships were the pride of the human armada. Now, they were the last remnants of Earth's once mighty military might. Each vessel was a colossus, bristling with ancient weapons that had been designed to repel invasions from both within and beyond the Milky Way. Yet, they had never been used, not in the way they were meant to. Earth had fallen too quickly. General Markus Draven stood on the command deck of the flagship, the Resolute, his hands gripping the metal railing as the planet shrank beneath them. The ship's main display screens flickered to life, showing him detailed readouts of the fleet. Nearly 24 warships, each one an armored behemoth, were now fully operational. Beneath the steel, cybernetic crew members, humans enhanced with advanced neural interfaces, were coming online. They had been preserved just like Draven, ready to serve when the time was right. Draven turned his gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the cold void, were the lost fragments of humanity. The remnants who had survived, adapted, and evolved in ways Draven couldn't imagine. But they were fractured, weak. He was going to change that. He was going to bring them back together, forge them into something greater than they had ever been. "Status report," Draven ordered, his voice echoing across the bridge. A tall figure stepped forward, an artificial intelligence that had been modeled to look almost human, but with a body of polished steel and eyes that glowed a deep, electric blue. Her name was Vera, one of the most advanced AI systems ever developed, capable of processing information faster than any human mind. "All systems functional, General," Vera replied, her voice smooth and without inflection. "The fleet is ready for departure. Weapon systems are fully operational and long-range scanners are active. We are detecting no immediate threats in this sector." Draven nodded. "Good. Set course for Sector X-22. That's where we'll begin." Sector X-22 was a dangerous region of space, located on the edge of human exploration. Before Earth had fallen, it had been marked as a potential expansion zone for human colonies. Since then, it had become a lawless frontier, home to pirates, rogue factions, and who knew what else. But according to the archives, there were human settlements there, fragments of Earth's population who had fled after the collapse. "We'll start with them," Draven muttered to himself, eyes narrowing. "They'll join us, or they'll fall." Vera processed the coordinates and sent the information to the fleet. "Course plotted, General. Estimated arrival in 7 standard days." Draven turned and began to walk toward the massive viewing port at the front of the bridge. As he gazed out into the infinite black, His mind began to churn. How many humans were left? What had become of them? He had fought his entire life to protect Earth. And now, he was fighting for something even bigger, for the survival of humanity as a species. The stakes had never been higher. Markus, the voice behind him, was familiar, but unexpected. Draven turned to see Sarah, one of his oldest comrades, standing in the doorway. She looked exactly as he remembered her. Dark hair pulled back into a tight braid, her face hard and determined, dressed in the same combat armor she had worn during their last battle on Earth. But Sarah, too, had been preserved in stasis all these years. "Sarah," Draven said, his voice softening for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "You're awake." "Of course I am," she said with a smirk, stepping forward. "You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun without me, did you?" Draven allowed himself a small smile. Sarah had been his second-in-command during the final days of Earth's defense. She was one of the best soldiers he had ever known. Fierce, loyal, and relentless. If anyone could help him bring humanity back from the brink, it was her. "We're headed for Sector X-22, Draven explained. "There are human settlements there. At least, that's what the records say." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression turning serious. "And what happens if they don't want to join us?" Draven's gaze hardened. "Then we remind them of who they are. They're not just survivors. They're human. And humanity doesn't survive. We thrive." Sarah gave a nod of approval, her eyes glinting with the same fire Draven felt burning in his chest. Together, they would bring humanity back from the edge of extinction. 7 days later, the fleet dropped out of warp space with a violent shudder, the stars snapping back into focus as the ship stabilized. Draven stood on the bridge, watching the tactical displays light up with data from the surrounding area. "We've arrived," Vera announced, scanning for human settlements. Draven's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the first step in his plan to reunite humanity. As the scanners swept the sector, an alert suddenly pinged across the display. Vera tilted her head, processing the new information. "We've detected multiple human signatures, General. There are settlements on the planets orbiting the nearby binary star system." Draven's eyes narrowed. "Are they armed?" "Yes," Vera replied. "They appear to have developed significant defense systems. However, their technology is outdated compared to ours. They would not pose a significant threat." Draven's lips curled into a grim smile. "Then let's pay them a visit. Shall we initiate contact?" Vera asked. "Not yet," Draven replied, his tone cold and calculating. "First, we see what kind of people they've become." The fleet approached the system with silent precision, their massive ships casting long shadows over the planets below. Draven stood tall on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the glowing orbs of the binary stars. Humanity's lost children were down there, living in the ruins of what they had once been. It was time to remind them of their legacy. "Prepare a tactical strike team," Draven ordered, his voice steady. "Sarah, you're with me. We're going down there." Within minutes, Draven and his team were suited up and ready to deploy. As the shuttle descended toward the planet's surface, Draven's mind raced with possibilities. Would the people below welcome them as saviors or resist them as conquerors? It didn't matter. Either way, they would fall in line. As the shuttle touched down, kicking up dust on the barren ground, Draven stepped out into the harsh light of the twin suns. Around him, the landscape was desolate, a wasteland scarred by centuries of neglect. But in the distance, he could see the outline of a settlement. Sarah joined him at his side, her rifle slung across her shoulder. "What do you think we'll find here?" she asked. Draven's expression was unreadable. Survivors. And survivors always know how to fight. The team moved forward, advancing toward the settlement. As they approached, figures began to emerge from the shadows, ragged, weary, but unmistakably human. Their eyes were wide with shock and fear as they took in the sight of Draven and his soldiers. One man stepped forward, his face gaunt but defiant. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "What do you want?" Draven stepped forward, his presence towering over the man. "We are the future of humanity," he said, his voice low and powerful. "And we've come to take you home." The air was thick with tension. The man standing in front of Draven was no ordinary survivor. He had the look of a hardened soldier, someone who had seen too much death, too many battles. His ragged clothes were reinforced with patches of armor, and a worn blaster was slung over his shoulder. His people, hidden behind crude barricades, stared at Draven's team with wide, cautious eyes. "What do you mean, home?" the man asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Draven stepped forward, his armored boots crunching on the dusty ground. The twin suns above beat down harshly, casting long shadows behind him and his soldiers. Behind him, Sarah and the rest of the tactical team kept their weapons at the ready, but Draven didn't expect this encounter to turn violent yet. "I mean Earth," Draven said, his voice carrying across the barren settlement, the place where all this began, the home of our ancestors, humanity's birthright. The man's eyes flickered with recognition, but it wasn't the warm nostalgia that Draven had hoped for. Instead, the man's expression darkened, and he spat on the ground. "Earth is a myth," he snarled, "a ghost story for children. It burned, and the people who stayed behind burned with it. You think we don't know that?" Draven clenched his jaw. The words stung, but they weren't unexpected. Centuries had passed since the collapse. The truth of Earth's fall had been twisted, forgotten, and reshaped into legend. These people had grown up hearing stories of a dead world, a world they thought was lost forever. But Draven knew better. "You survived out here," Draven said, his tone softening but still commanding. "You've held on while the rest of the galaxy moved on. That's commendable. But surviving isn't enough anymore. Humanity is more than just scattered tribes, clinging to life on the edges of space. We were meant for more. I'm here to bring you back into the fold, to make you part of something greater." The man let out a bitter laugh, and the sound carried through the settlement like a challenge. "And what is that, huh? What's this great thing you're promising? Some kind of empire? Another ruler to chain us down?" Draven's eyes narrowed. "Not an empire, a united people. One species, one force, stronger than we ever were before. No more isolation, no more running." Sarah stepped forward, her expression fierce. "You're living on scraps," she said bluntly. "Fighting over scraps. While the galaxy forgets you, we're offering you a chance to rise, to be part of something that will change everything." The crowd around them stirred, whispers spreading through the settlers. Fear, curiosity, anger. The emotions were swirling together, and Draven could sense that this confrontation was reaching a tipping point. The man standing in front of him, clearly the leader of these people, glanced back at his group, his eyes scanning their faces. He saw the fear in them, the uncertainty. Draven could tell he was losing his grip on them. Their survival instincts were kicking in. They knew that whatever was happening now was bigger than the fragile existence they had carved out here. "I'm General Markus Draven," Draven said, his voice steady, confident. "I fought for Earth before the fall. I was there when the skies burned, when we made our last stand. I'm not asking you to follow me blindly. I'm asking you to remember who you are." The leader's face twitched with uncertainty. Draven took a step closer, lowering his voice, but making sure it carried just enough to reach the people gathered behind their leader. "You are human," Draven continued. "You are part of the most resilient, resourceful, and determined species in this galaxy. You survived out here because of that, but there's a storm coming, bigger than anything you've faced. If you stay here, alone, isolated, you will be swept away by it." The man's eyes locked onto Draven's. For a long moment, there was silence. The crowd, the soldiers, the entire settlement seemed to hold its breath. And then the man lowered his head, just slightly. "We'll hear you out," he muttered. Draven exhaled, tension he didn't realize he'd been holding releasing from his chest. He nodded. "Good. You've made the right choice." Sarah shot Draven a sidelong glance. "That was close," she murmured. Draven nodded. He knew that one wrong move could have turned this into a bloodbath. These people were on edge, desperate, but also proud. Breaking their spirit wasn't an option. They needed to see that joining him wasn't surrender, but survival. The leader of the settlers, whose name Draven would later learn was Corvin, led him and his team into the heart of the settlement. The buildings were crude but functional, built from the scraps of long-forgotten technology and whatever resources they could scavenge. There was a makeshift command center at the center, filled with worn-out consoles and flickering monitors. The settlement was small, but it was clear they had been here for a long time. As they entered the command center, Corvin turned to face Draven again, his expression still guarded. "You've got a lot of nerve, Draven," he said, his voice low. "Coming here, talking like you know what we've been through." "I don't," Draven admitted, "but I know what's coming. And if you don't join us, you'll be caught in the crossfire. The galaxy isn't the place it was before the collapse. There are forces out there, powers, that won't care about your little settlement. They'll crush you without a second thought." Corvin was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the monitors in front of him. Draven could tell he was weighing his options, trying to figure out if he could trust him. The man had been a leader for a long time, and leaders didn't trust easily. Finally, Corvin spoke. "All right, let's say we do join you. What happens then? What do you expect from us?" Draven met Corvin's gaze, his expression hard. "I expect you to fight." Corvin's brow furrowed. "Fight? Against who?" "The galaxy's changed," Draven said. "New empires have risen. Old enemies have grown stronger. There are alien factions that see humanity as nothing more than a remnant of the past, a weak species scattered across the stars. But we're not weak. We never were. And I won't let anyone take what's left of us without a fight." Corvin crossed his arms, his gaze skeptical. "And you think we can fight them? With what? Look around you. We're barely scraping by here." Draven smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen too many battles, who knew what was at stake. "You won't be alone. I've got a fleet. Ships armed with weapons your enemies can't even imagine. Technology from the old world. And I've got soldiers. Trained, enhanced, ready to fight for a new future." Corvin's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the fleet. "You have a fleet?" "I do," Draven said, his voice steady. "And we're going to use it to remind the galaxy that humanity isn't finished." "Not yet." Corvin looked down, his expression conflicted. Draven could see the gears turning in his mind, the calculations being made. Finally, Corvin sighed and looked back up at Draven. "All right," he said, his voice resigned but firm. "We'll join you. But don't expect us to be your cannon fodder. We fight for our survival, not for your empire." Draven's smile returned, this time with genuine respect. "No empire, just a united humanity." Sarah stepped forward, a satisfied grin on her face. "Welcome to the fight." Later, on board the Resolute, the settlement's leaders had been briefed, and preparations were already underway to integrate them into the fleet. Draven stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the planet fade into the distance as the ships broke orbit. Corvin and his people were on board now, part of something much larger than themselves. "They'll need time," Sarah said, standing next to him. "They're not soldiers. Not yet. They will be," Draven said confidently. "When the time comes, they'll fight. They'll have no choice." Sarah glanced over at him. "And when that time comes, what are we fighting for, exactly? Is it just survival? Or is it something more?" Draven's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "We're fighting for the future, for what's left of our people. We're fighting so that humanity has a place in this galaxy." Sarah nodded, her eyes dark with understanding. "And if the galaxy doesn't want us to have that place?" Draven's expression hardened. "Then we take it." The cold void of space stretched endlessly in front of Draven as he stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his eyes locked on the tactical displays showing the vastness of Sector X-22. The recently integrated settlers, under Corvin's reluctant leadership, had joined his cause. But this was just the beginning. Draven knew that forging a united humanity would take more than just a few settlements. It would require a revolution, and revolutions had never come easy. "General, incoming communication." Vera's synthetic voice chimed in, pulling Draven from his thoughts. "It's a wideband signal originating from the outer edges of the sector. Draven's brow furrowed. Wideband signals weren't common out here in the frontier. Most communications were point-to-point, private, and encrypted to avoid interception by raiders or enemy factions. A wideband meant someone wanted to be heard by everyone. "Put through," Draven ordered. The display in front of him flickered, and a grainy hologram materialized. It was the image of a man, grizzled, scarred, and with an unsettling glint in his eyes. His uniform was tattered, but Draven could tell from the insignia on his shoulder that he had once served in a military outfit. Not human, though. His face was distinctly alien, with dark, ridged skin and glowing orange eyes. A Rinian, a species Draven knew well from his time before the collapse. They had been hostile to humanity then, and from the look on this one's face, that hadn't changed. "Humans," the Rinian hissed, his voice crackling over the transmission. "You have strayed too close to the territories of the Sovereign Empire. You will be granted this one opportunity to turn back. Disobey, and you will face the full wrath of the Empire." Draven felt the familiar heat of anger rise in his chest. The Sovereign Empire, one of the many alien factions that had risen to power in the aftermath of Earth's fall. They had expanded aggressively, claiming territory once occupied by human colonies and taking over entire sectors once belonging to the United Earth government. To them, humans were little more than a nuisance, a dying race clinging to the remnants of their former glory. Before Draven could respond, Sarah stepped up beside him. "The Sovereign Empire," she muttered under her breath. "I thought we'd run into them eventually." Draven clenched his fists. "We're not turning back." Vera processed the message, her eyes glowing softly as she analyzed the transmission. "General, the transmission was broadcast from the Sovereign Empire's forward command post in this sector. They've established control over several key systems nearby. I estimate their fleet size to be significant." "Good," Draven said, his voice dark. "It'll be a test run for us." He turned back toward the hologram, addressing the Rinian commander with an icy calm. "This is General Markus Draven, commander of the last human war fleet. We're not going anywhere. If you think your empire can stop us, you're welcome to try." The Rinian's face twisted into a snarl. "You dare defy the Sovereign Empire? You have chosen your fate, human." The transmission cut out abruptly, the hologram flickering and disappearing. The silence on the bridge was thick, but it was the silence before a storm. "Vera, how long until their fleet reaches us?" Draven asked. Vera's eyes blinked as she processed the data. "Based on the current location of their forward base and typical warp speeds, I estimate contact within 12 standard hours. Their fleet will likely consist of a mix of war frigates and destroyers, potentially with a capital ship leading the formation." Draven turned toward Sarah, a grim smile forming on his lips. "Looks like we're going to have our first real battle." Sarah nodded, the same glint of anticipation in her eyes. "It's about time." The Resolute hung in the cold depths of space, its sleek form blending into the void as it waited for the approaching enemy fleet. Draven stood on the command deck, every muscle tense with anticipation. The fleet he had gathered wasn't large by galactic standards, but it was powerful, armed with technology from Earth's final days, weapons that had never been fully tested in open war. "Enemy fleet on approach." Vera's voice broke the silence. "They are deploying a standard assault formation. 3 frigates, 2 destroyers, and a carrier-class capital ship." Draven nodded. "Ready all weapons. Tell the fleet to maintain formation." Sarah moved beside him, her gaze locked on the tactical display. "Do you think they're underestimating us?" "They are," Draven replied coldly. "And that's their mistake." The moments stretched into minutes as the 2 fleets closed the distance between them. On the display, Draven could see the enemy ships moving into an attack formation, their engines flaring brightly as they prepared to engage. "Enemy ships within range," Vera announced. "Weapons are powering up." Draven's pulse quickened. "All ships. Target the enemy frigates first. Hit them hard. Fast. Take them out before they can coordinate." The Resolute's weapons systems hummed to life, and moments later, the ship's main cannons fired. Blinding streaks of energy shot across the void, slamming into the lead enemy frigate. The Rhenian vessel shuddered under the impact, its shields flaring brightly as they struggled to absorb the blow. Direct hit, Vera reported. Their shields are weakening. All ships, fire at will. Draven commanded. Across the fleet, heavy weapons opened up, unleashing a torrent of firepower that tore through space toward the approaching Rhenian vessels. Explosions blossomed in the distance as the first frigate's shields finally collapsed, the hull tearing apart in a brilliant burst of debris. Frigate down, Sarah called, her voice full of satisfaction. But the Rhenians were already retaliating. The capital ship, a hulking behemoth of metal and firepower, launched a volley of torpedoes aimed directly at the Resolute. The ship shuddered as the torpedoes impacted its shields, but the advanced defenses held firm. "They're concentrating fire on us," Vera said, her tone calm. "Shields are holding, but continued bombardment will cause them to degrade." Draven's eyes were locked on the tactical display. "Tell the fleet to press the attack. Take out those destroyers." The battle raged, the void filled with the deadly light of weapons fire and the silent explosions of ships being torn apart. Draven could feel the tension in the air, every moment a test of his fleet's strength, every command a step closer to victory or defeat. The Sovereign Empire's ships were powerful, but they lacked the precision and coordination of Draven's forces. "Destroyer down," Sarah reported, her voice tight with concentration. But even as the enemy forces began to crumble, Draven knew this was only the beginning. The Sovereign Empire was vast, and they would not take this defeat lightly. "General, the capital ship is retreating," Vera said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "They're withdrawing." Draven watched the display as the massive Rhenian capital ship turned, its engines flaring as it began to pull away from the battlefield. The remaining enemy ships followed suit, limping back toward the safety of their territory. "They're retreating?" Sarah asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "That doesn't make sense. They had more ships. They could have pressed the attack." Draven frowned, his mind racing. "They're buying time. They weren't here to win." Sarah's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "They wanted to see what we're capable of," Draven said, his tone grim. "This was just a probe. The real threat is still out there, back at the command center on the Resolute." The battle was over, but Draven's mind was far from at ease. As the enemy fleet limped away, leaving wreckage and debris in their wake, he knew that this skirmish was merely a precursor to something far more dangerous. The Sovereign Empire had tested them, and they had held their ground, but they wouldn't be underestimated again. Draven stood in the command center, staring out into the blackness of space through the large viewport. The flicker of distant stars was calming, but behind them lay the harsh reality of the galaxy. "They'll be back," Sarah said quietly, standing next to him. "And next time, they won't hold back." Draven nodded, his jaw clenched. "We need to be ready. We need more ships, more people. We've barely scratched the surface of what's out there. We've got to move faster." Sarah was quiet for a moment before asking the question that had been hanging in the air. "What's the next move?" Draven turned to face her, his eyes cold and determined. "We expand. We find more of our people. We gather strength. The Sovereign Empire won't wait long before coming back for us. And when they do, we'll need every human we can find." Sarah gave a sharp nod. "Then we keep moving." Draven glanced back at the tactical map. The galaxy was a hostile place. The Sovereign Empire was just one of many powers that saw humanity as a threat. But Draven had a vision, a united humanity, strong and defiant, ready to claim its place in the stars. "Plot a course for the next sector," Draven ordered. "We're not done yet." The fleet drifted silently in deep space, the wreckage of the Rhenian vessels still floating in the void behind them, a testament to the battle that had raged hours earlier. The Resolute led the formation, its dark hull gleaming faintly against the starlight, a symbol of humanity's resilience. But General Markus Draven knew this moment of calm was only temporary. The true storm had yet to arrive. For months, Draven's mission to unite the scattered remnants of humanity had been one victory after another. Settlement after settlement, human colonies, long forgotten by the galaxy, had joined his cause. His fleet had grown, bolstered by volunteers and warriors from every corner of the human diaspora. But the forces against them were growing stronger too. The Sovereign Empire had not retreated to lick its wounds. They were preparing for something bigger, something final. Every intel report, every intercepted communication pointed to a massive assault. The Empire would bring the full weight of their forces down on Draven's fleet, hoping to crush humanity's last hope for resurgence in a single, decisive strike. Draven stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out into the darkness. Behind him, Sarah and the other senior officers were coordinating with the growing fleet, preparing for the battle that was surely coming. Corvin, now one of Draven's most trusted lieutenants, had become the voice of the settlers who had joined their cause, bringing their fighting spirit to the growing ranks of human warriors. "They'll come for us soon," Sarah said, stepping up beside Draven. Her eyes were hard, but there was a flicker of doubt behind them. "And this time, they won't send just a probing force. They'll throw everything they have at us." Draven's expression didn't waver. "Let them. We're ready." But were they? The fleet had grown. There were no doubts about that. Thousands of ships, piloted by the fiercest men and women humanity had to offer, now stood ready to fight. But they were still outnumbered, still the underdog in a galaxy dominated by alien empires that saw humanity as little more than a nuisance, a relic of a bygone age. Sarah's brow furrowed as she looked at Draven. "Do you really think we can win this? I mean, this isn't just another skirmish. The Sovereign Empire will bring their full might. We'll be facing entire armadas, maybe even the core fleet. They won't hold back this time." Draven turned to face her, his eyes cold and steely. "We're not just fighting to win a battle, Sarah. We're fighting to show the galaxy that humanity still matters, that we can't be erased." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then we make our stand." Hours later, the calm before the storm. In the command center of the Resolute, the hum of preparations filled the air. Draven, Sarah, and the rest of the fleet's command staff had gathered around the central tactical display, watching as new information flowed in from their scouts and long-range sensors. "The enemy fleet is massive," Vera reported, her synthetic voice cutting through the tension. "We're detecting multiple carrier groups, along with several capital-class warships. The Sovereign Empire has mobilized nearly every available vessel in this sector. They are converging on our location." Draven's jaw tightened. He had expected this. The Empire wanted to make an example of them, to show the galaxy that resistance to their rule was futile. But he had no intention of letting them succeed. "We hold the line," Draven said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "No retreat, no surrender." Sarah glanced at him, her face set in grim resolve. "And if they overwhelm us?" Draven didn't blink. "Then we make them bleed." The command center was silent for a moment, each officer processing the weight of Draven's words. They all knew what was at stake. This battle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about legacy, about showing the galaxy that humanity, even after centuries of scattering and near extinction, would not go quietly into the void. The final battle, humanity's last stand. The stars were blotted out as the Sovereign Empire's fleet emerged from warp space. The sheer number of enemy ships was staggering. Hundreds upon hundreds of warships, their massive forms bristling with weapons. At the center of the formation was the Harbinger, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the largest ships in Draven's fleet. It was the symbol of the Empire's power, an unstoppable force that had crushed countless rebellions in its long history. But Draven wasn't intimidated. He stood at the center of the Resolute's command deck, his eyes locked on the approaching enemy fleet. "Vera, status on our forces?" Draven asked, his voice steady. "We're fully deployed, General," Vera replied. "All ships are in formation. Fighters are ready for launch. We await your command." Draven nodded. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. "All ships," Draven said, his voice ringing out through the fleet's communication network. "Today, we stand united. Today, we show the galaxy that humanity will not be broken. They think they can crush us, that will scatter and fade into history. But they're wrong. Today, we fight for more than survival. We fight for our place in the stars. He paused, letting his words sink in. Fire at will. The first salvo came from a Resolute, its massive cannons unleashing a torrent of energy that streaked across the void, slamming into the leading edge of the enemy fleet. The other ships followed suit, and soon the darkness of space was lit up by the fury of battle. Blasts of energy and torpedoes streaked back and forth, and the space between the two fleets became a storm of destruction. The Sovereign Empire's ships responded in kind, their powerful weapons returning fire with relentless precision. The battle was chaotic, brutal. Ships on both sides were torn apart, their hulls disintegrating in massive explosions that scattered debris across the battlefield. Draven's fleet fought with a ferocity born from desperation and hope. The human ships were faster, more agile than their bulkier counterparts, and they used their mobility to strike at key enemy positions, overwhelming the Empire's defenses with hit-and-run tactics. But the Empire was powerful, and their numbers seemed endless. For every enemy ship destroyed, another took its place, and the Harbinger loomed ever closer, its massive weapons charging for a devastating strike. "General, the Harbinger is powering up its main cannon," Vera warned, her voice urgent. "If they fire, we won't be able to hold." Draven's mind raced. The Harbinger was the key to the battle. If they could take it down, the rest of the Empire's fleet would falter. But it was heavily armored, and the combined firepower of their fleet might not be enough to destroy it before it fired its superweapon. Unless, Sarah, Draven called, his voice tight with decision. "Prepare the Resolute for a direct assault." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're not serious." "We can't." "We can, and we will." Draven cut her off. "The Harbinger is the key. We take it down, or we lose." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Understood." The Resolute broke formation, its engines flaring as it surged toward the Harbinger. The massive dreadnought loomed ahead, its weapon systems glowing with deadly energy. Draven knew this was a gamble, a desperate, last-ditch effort, but it was the only way. "Vera, focus all power to the forward shields," Draven ordered. "We're going in." The Resolute raced toward the Harbinger, dodging enemy fire as it closed the distance. Draven's heart pounded in his chest, but his hands were steady on the controls. This was the moment. Everything they had fought for had led to this. As they neared the Harbinger, the massive dreadnought's main cannon fired. A blinding beam of energy tore through space, aimed directly at the heart of Draven's fleet. But the Resolute was faster, diving under the beam just in time. "Now," Draven shouted. The Resolute's cannons fired at point-blank range, unleashing a devastating barrage that slammed into the Harbinger's weak points. Explosions rippled across the dreadnought's surface as its shields buckled under the assault. The massive ship shuddered, its systems failing. And then, with a deafening roar, the Harbinger exploded, a brilliant burst of light that consumed the battlefield. For a moment, there was silence. The enemy fleet, stunned by the destruction of their flagship, faltered. And then, one by one, they began to retreat.